And here we are, Ways and Means Committee, February 18th, Wednesday, 10:50. And we are picking up H 567 for a vote. Can I have
Yes, Madam Chair, first we have an amendment from the House Ways and Means Committee on H 567, and I would move that we find draft 1.1 favorable.
Thank you so much. Do you have a second?
I will make a second.
Thank you so much, Representative Wozniak. We have to really, do things with this machine, folks, if we're gonna get through crossover. Thank you. Representative Wozniak has a second. Any discussion on the amendment?
Does the amendment include the, three new positions?
No, it does not.
The amendment clearly is to limit total amount to be diverted to these two different funds, uses, $300,000. Whereas before in the original underlying bill, it was not so restricted.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, if the clerk could please call the roll on the amendment.
On the amendment, Representative Brannigan.
Yes.
I'll vote yes as Representative Burkhardt, Representative Higley,
Yes.
Representative Holcomb. Yes. Representative Kimball,
Yes,
Representative Maslin. Representative Odie. Yes. Representative Page,
Yes.
Representative Wozniak,
Yes.
Representative Canfield,
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
The amendments was voted favorable 11-0-0.
Thank you.
now we have the underlying bill, Madam Chair, which I would move that we find favorable H 567
Thank you.
as amended.
Thank you. Representative Kimball moves H 567 as amended. Representative Wozniak seconds. Any discussion? Representative Higley.
A question, I guess. Under whose authority with the three positions, two full-time, which would be paid for by the unclaimed special properties, the unclaimed property special fund, and the one full-time, which would be proportionally paid from three different retirement systems. Who has the authority to do that? Is that Ways and Means, approach the treasurer?
That's a probes.
Yeah, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Seeing no further discussion, if the clerk could please call the roll.
Representative Brannigan.
Yes.
I'll vote yes as Representative Burkhardt, Representative Higley,
Yes.
Representative Holcomb. Yes. Representative Kimball.
Yes,
Representative Maslin.
Yep.
Representative Odie. Yes. Representative Page. Representative Wozniak.
Yes.
Representative Canfield
Yes.
and Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
We have voted the bill favorable as amended 11-0-0.
Thank you very much, everyone. We are going to take a 5-minute break while we wait for the Agency of Education and John to come. And still Ways and Means, we are looking at school district reserve guidance. I asked, I think last time we discussed this, we heard from the Education Commission on the states about what other states do on this. And I asked, I think there was sort of a question about, is our legislative intent towards the agency, with the Agency of Education, clear enough for them to sort of deliver what we want to deliver? And so I asked John to make some updates to the statute, so we can gather what we need to gather, both for, as we look at budgets for the next couple years before Act 73 is implemented. There's a lot of questions about how reserves are used differently for different districts to navigate this challenging time. And then there's an even more of sort of a policy spotlight in the context of the foundation formula and school construction. And so, John, do you want to join us? Thank you. Really encourage folks to, if you can pull up that testimony from last time we talked about this from the Education Commission on the States. His name was Chris Duncombe.
Good morning, everyone.
Sorry, one more thing. Does everyone know how to pull up past testimony by witness rather than by date? It's a really lovely thing. Great. Okay. Unless you're looking for something from Julia Richter, and then there's too much in there for it to be findable.
Chris Duncombe, DNCOMBE from Education.
So the floor is yours now that I've interrupted you 3 times.
Perfect. John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am going to screen share. I did take my cue exactly from that. One of the things that Chris from ECS had linked to in his testimony was a document from the Government Finance Officers Association that provided kind of generic principles for thinking about reserve balances and the kinds of considerations that folks should undertake when they're developing their policies related to how to manage reserves or just general funds. And so I took my cue from there. And what you're going to see in this pretty simple draft is an amendment to the 2024 yield bill, which contained rulemaking authority for the Agency of Education to initiate by January 1st of 2025, rulemaking to update district quality standards to include recommended reserve fund account standards. However, that's kind of the extent of what that authorization initially contained. It said, do this date, and consult with local school officials when you do that. The discussion last week was about, in part, whether or not there was sufficient guidance as to what it means to actually recommend account standards. So this draft changes the timeline, the relevant party to be consulted with, and boosts out what that actual rulemaking authority would be. So on or before the end of this year, December 31st, 2026, the Agency of Education, in partnership with the Vermont Association of School Business Officials, shall complete, so this is rather than initiating by a particular date, this is completing by a particular date. I would just note that rulemaking can take some time, but if that process has begun, maybe this is achievable. Well, on or before December 31st, AOE, in partnership with VASBO, shall complete rulemaking to update the district quality standards to include recommended reserve fund account standards. Then here's the actual boosted out language, the legislative guidance for this rulemaking. The agency shall specifically adopt rules to, 1, prescribe minimum and maximum balance levels for reserve fund. And then there's a consideration that they would undertake when prescribing these balance levels, taking into consideration revenue predictability and expenditure volatility, exposure to significant one-time expenses, and impact on credit ratings. You could have this just as a prescription for maximum balance levels without any particular considerations. But there are some considerations listed here just for folks to talk about. These are the sorts of things that might inform what you think appropriate levels are. Second, specifically adopt rules to specify acceptable conditions that warrant use of the reserve fund. So what are permissible uses and the period within which funds may be used. So you can imagine that certain things trigger usage of the reserve fund. How long does that trigger last, basically? Third, establish best practices for replenishing a depleted reserve fund. If you had to dip in, how do you deal with that depletion, including the period over which the reserve fund should be replenished? So what kinds of fund should be used to replenish it, and over what period should you think about that? And then lastly, kind of a catch-all piece here dealing with the fact that you're generating generally applicable standards. Identify the conditions that may justify deviation from any broadly applicable standards adopted pursuant to this section. This is something that doesn't show up in the Government Finance Officers Association report. This is just a thought that I had. You can imagine that if you have standards out there, folks better or worse comply with those. It might be helpful, I would think, to know when someone has like a justifiable reason to diverge. So this is just a proposal, not something that has to be included, but it'd be nice to know what kind of conditions justify deviation from these broader standards. There are 4 specific authorities here. What levels are appropriate? What are acceptable uses? How should you replenish a depleted fund? And then when should you, or when is it permissible essentially to deviate from those standards? Would take effect July 2026. Relatively simple and broadly drawn from that document that the ECS folks had linked to.
Imagine we wanted to take effect on passage just to give them a little bit more time.
Sure.
So law, they should have started already.
Exactly. This is actually extending, this is extending what's being done. I mean, the other thing that we know happens during session, of course, is you're sending cues.
Yes.
So folks are already sometimes complying with the law in the advance of it, even explaining the law. So.
Yeah, Representative Burkhardt.
Is there a mechanism right now when districts report their budget or their proposed budgets and the budgets that pass to the AOE? Is there already a mechanism to do something like explain why their reserves might not, match standards? Or do we need to say something in language about how districts are going to report about what their reserves are and why they might deviate from the standards?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not aware of.
We're going to talk to the agency right after John.
Okay.
Anyone else questions for John? Edits for John? Ideas about how to fix everything in the whole wide world? Okay. Do you have any ideas, Representative Brannigan? Was it that last question?
And it takes me a while to process stuff and then get it out. you
I'm
know?
drinking coffee, so I'm moving too fast. I'm sorry.
Okay. Are we taking away local control here more? Are we taking things away from local school boards? Like if they want to set money aside for a classic example, the new gym floor, are we limiting their ability to do that or not? I honestly don't know from this wording.
I mean, I think we're just adding more clarity to something we already passed in statute last year,
Yeah.
but I don't know, John, do you want to?
The thing I would offer is these are recommended, it's rulemaking, it's just cabining the rulemaking authority for AOE. And the rulemaking is on recommended reserve fund account standards. So it doesn't speak to the extent to which folks comply with the standards or what permissible deviation is. It just says when you're developing these standards, include these factors. So I don't see it as changing. Maybe I would have to think more, but it's just counting for what falls within the standards rather than saying there will or won't be standards.
So are we giving the AOE the idea that we want them to make parameters for the school districts? They already know that from what we did last year, right?
This is even prior to last year. This is 2024 Field Bill, this authority for developing reserve standards.
Okay.
So this,
And it's more than an authority, it's a mandate.
yes, yeah. Sorry, I keep saying it that way because we have to extend legislative powers to the executive branch, but yes, it's mandatory.
So it's been done
It hasn't been done. We just put it into statute.
and it hasn't been done. Okay.
Hence
That's right.
the renewed clarity.
Chair. John, can you explain why the word complete is used rather than initiate on the rulemaking process?
I can try. I mean, the simple thing to say is that this is setting a deadline for, we want these rules by X date. You could ask the question whether or not that's achievable. I think that's a worthwhile question to ask. My guess is that because you're amending a section that already had initiate as of a particular date. You're now just clarifying that hasn't happened, we would like the rules.
Okay,
But yeah, it's as simple as soon as these can come out, they would be appreciated. That is my plain English read of this.
thank you.
Yeah. And you could choose different dates, of course. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work on that. Sandra, Kelly, however you two would like to join or not join. And I'm sorry that we sent you the language so very late for you to think about.
That was okay. We're happy to see some language. So
Great.
thank you for that. I do not have the link. Great.
You need to share your screen?
I don't think so.
Oh, great, then. You don't need the link.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay.
So Kelly Murphy, Education Finance Director, and
Yeah, Cassandra Ryan, Chief Financial Officer.
so
Yep, sorry.
what we've prepared is just a slide deck, which is posted online, and I'll just kind of walk through the talking points. But since we were last in, we really have evaluated the language that is on the table right now for discussion, and also which was just reviewed with a little bit more clarity. And so what we would like to signal at this point is that we are going to be initiating rulemaking on this. And so having some clear language is super helpful
Okay.
as we embark on that endeavor, because we have not done it yet. And I really want to stress the yet. Our intention is to do it. And so I think the last time we were in here, maybe it was a little unclear as to what we were going to do. And so I just want to kind of share where we're at between, sort of when we were in the last time and where we are now. And so what has happened is AOE Finance has been charged with initiating formal rulemaking. And so Cassandra, our team, and on the finance division is going to be spearheading that, working with the district quality standards that were already put into rulemaking. So we will probably just be amending and inserting language there. We also have requested existing district fund balance policies. And so we had those previously, but we'd like to match those up to, what we had sort of brought in as industry standards as the last time, and then work from there. And then we've got some internal work to do. So in looking at the data that we have within AOE that we collect from the districts, there's some variation in what's in that data. And so we really need to offer guidance on what we're going to be looking at and make sure it's tied back to things like the audit. So then we're really working with clear standards as we move forward. So we'd like to enhance the accuracy, making sure that it's tied back to the document of record. We want to make sure that all the districts are reporting consistently, because we did see in the form that we use that it's not consistent across the board.
By consistent, do you mean everyone's using a different definition? Or do you mean that the timing is inconsistent?
So what I mean
All
by-
of those things. What do you mean by
All of those
inconsistent?
things probably do exist, and we'd like to look at it more closely. But what I did see in first pass is that you might, what you would expect to see, something categorized as, for instance, unassigned fund balance, and see in the bottom line, you might actually see characterized in a different way.
Okay.
And so that's what I mean by that. And so we talked a little bit about all the definitions that would go into a fund balance last time. And the reason why we provided that is because I want to make sure there's clarity around how districts are using that. That's also an area that we want to get a little clarity on when we look at the existing statute, for example, because there could potentially be a little bit of variation or conflict in the way that the statute is currently written. So that's not, we might want to discuss that, but for the rulemaking itself, we would want to provide guidance around how districts would be using their reserves. So that's the piece around the improvement of the data quality. We're receiving it. Districts are, giving us good information. We just really need to vet and really scrub how, we're pulling that into the agency. We'd also like to provide training on the reserve collection and making sure it ties back to the audits, which we just talked about. And then it would just providing some standardization in that collection. So right now it's assumed that everybody knows.
Hmm.
But there is interpretation.
Do you, would it be helpful for us to add a section or subsection to the language that we just looked at to reference sort of the need for more definitional?
I think that could certainly help. So in the next steps, so there are several, and so as we're thinking about this, is we did want to be thoughtful about providing a timeline and not keeping it kind of open-ended. And so this timeline that we have in the slides is really rough. And with the language that we have on the table right now, it will amend this timeline, but at least knowing sort of what you're considering, we can kind of look into that a little bit more and maybe provide in a future presentation, what that would really mean. And so Cassandra and I took a look at the existing just rulemaking within Act 183 and sort of came up with this timeline before we had a chance to really take a look at the language that we received this morning. So anyway, long story short, we're working right now and consulting with the districts. We'll need to bring in AOE legal counsel just to kind of review what's possible, and then Secretary of State's office with the rulemaking process. So we would think before we look at the language that's on the table right now, that process would be February to June. So just giving you a rough timeline, just so we can kind of start to narrow what that might be.
February, meaning the February we're existing in.
Right, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
And then establishing a meaningful timeline, because we do want to be realistic. We don't want to just say we're going to do it and then I like a good timeline. So that's kind of to be determined depending on where this conversation goes. And then we really want to identify current statute that either supports or is in conflict with the reserve guidance. And so I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier, and there are two instances. So in the surplus statute language, there is, it allows for districts to reserve under certain conditions, but it is not necessarily explicit in terms of specific items. So they would have to be voted. And so depending on what you want to reserve, there is, I think, a range in the types of reserves you might have. And so whether it's going for capital or maybe programming or what the intent there is. So I think there's just a conversation that needs to be had. And then we also noticed or picked up on the construction guidance. And I feel like that's kind of a hot topic that we'll want to kind of talk through. And so that might have some separate contingencies. And so right now in the statute, there's a 5-year kind of timeline for reporting those reserves. And when you're doing these projects, they're big projects, and they're, depending on what it is, you might need more time. So we want to talk about that a little bit. So in that instance, we were thinking currently February to June, same timeline as sort of the consultation and legal review and all of that. We would draft the language for the review standards for rulemaking in July of August. So we would crest into the new fiscal year. And then we would be doing that legal review also in July and August, and then we would be initiating the rulemaking in August. So that would be the timeline in sort of the existing language, but with the clarity, there may be an adjustment to this timeline. And then just last, in the slides, there's the reference materials. So just what we were considering, which we brought in last time.
Really appreciate that.
So be prepared.
So given the short notice that you had to look at the language, sort of flag the idea that we might want to add some language about you getting sort of clearer data definitions in place to some degree. Is there anything else you would like us to?
So we did take a quick look. We would really welcome the opportunity to respond thoughtfully to the language. There are a couple areas that I think we would, if you'll have us, we'd like the opportunity to kind of work through, such as sort of the time-bound nature, some of the thresholds, depending on what that might look like, just because the districts themselves, there's variability in what the need might be and how they might apply reserves. And so just thinking about equity when we do that. So that we do have comments for sure, but we're just happy to be able to collaborate.
Okay. Thanks. If we could hear from you sooner rather than later, like by the end of the week or early next week, that would.
Okay. Okay.
We're nearing crossover. Trying to get, yeah, thank you. Any questions from anyone?
I do, just as one. The existing uniform chart of accounts, are there already provisions within that chart of accounts for different types of reserves? Different codes, count numbers, that type of stuff?
So I do think that you capture the chart of accounts. I'd have to look at them specifically to see exactly, what would, be captured within the reserves specifically.
I mean, from a small business perspective, it's really easy to create a new chart of, an account and chart of accounts, but from a system-wide standpoint, not so easy.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to take a look at, because if you have your unassigned operating
Right.
reserve versus a construction reserve versus something else reserve, your total reserves. Very interesting to see what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah, we can get more information on that. We can show you the structure if that's helpful.
That'd be helpful. Yeah.
I just asked a question, actually, something that Charlie said. This was confusing for me when our district was going through school budgeting season. Unassigned fund balance isn't actually a reserve, right? It's just an unassigned fund balance. And then voters have to vote to take some of that and put it into different reserves. Is that correct? Is that how things work right now?
Yes, that's correct. Where the statute is.
Okay, just wanted to be clear, really for my own clarification. Thank you.
Or otherwise known as the kitty.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we are done until we're back here at 1:15. What a funny start and stop day.